This is the Cook County Sheriff's Office, and Jason, can you take it away?
Good evening, everyone. What a good showing. This is really wonderful. Thank you, Commissioner. My name is Jason Hernandez. I'm the Executive Director for Intergovernmental Relations with the Cook County Sheriff's Office. I'm going to provide a very general, broad overview of the department and some of our role. And I'm joined here today by my colleagues, Commander Jim Davis and Detective Lieutenant Mike Dwyer. They have a subject matter expertise that is it's just really, really wonderful. They have an enormous knowledge base, and I'm really glad that they're here with me today, so thank you. I want to take a moment to acknowledge and thank Commissioner Britton and his staff for organizing the event, and for Commissioner Britton's leadership on the county board. He is a deeply committed and principled advocate for the people of Cook County, and his office always puts forth an all-of-government approach to dealing with the big issues of the day, as evidenced by this panel here. So deeply, deeply appreciative of him and his staff for organizing this. Sheriff Dart is deeply concerned about the unfortunate rise in hate crimes that we're seeing reported throughout the nation, as well as a lot of the hateful rhetoric that has found a home on social media and in the deepest, darkest corners of the web. Our colleagues with the Cook County State's Attorney and the Department of Human Rights and Ethics can add additional context. But a good place to start this conversation is putting a finer point on what exactly is a hate crime. A hate crime is an offense where a person or a group of people is targeted because of their actual or perceived identity. And the laws here in Illinois around hate crimes are designed to protect people who are targeted based on characteristics such as race, color, religion, gender, sexual orientation, or physical or mental disability. This can take the form of assault or battery, theft, intimidation, stalking or cyber stalking, harassment via telecommunication, or the postal service, trespassing, or disorderly conduct. The Cook County Sheriff's Police Department is primarily responsible for patrolling unincorporated Cook County. However, when we receive word of a potential hate crime from a different law enforcement agency somewhere in the county that might be investigating it, especially if it warrants additional analysis, we regularly reach out and see if our office can provide some sort of assistance. We're all on the same team, and I would hope that would bring the people of Cook County some measure of comfort that we communicate very, very frequently about issues like this. Our office also has a number of very specialized units, such as a hostage barricade team or a bomb unit. We have SWAT teams and others that can take action in a moment's notice if, God forbid, there's some sort of incident in the county. But that collaboration that I mentioned is really critical. I can't emphasize that enough. We work very closely with our partners, and not just the local, but the state and federal government, on identifying potential threats to our communities. And we have task forces, we issue bulletins, we share intelligence, and assist other agencies on a regular basis. Of course, we also work very closely with our county partners like the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, and we're really proud of that collaboration and extensive coordination. That relationship is really critical in an effort to identifying, investigating, and ultimately prosecuting crimes throughout the county. Nonprofits also play a critical role in this law enforcement effort. Organizations like the Simon Wiesenthal Center, the Anti-Defamation League, we're in regular communication with them. And they have a unique insight into hate crimes and hate speech throughout not just Cook County, but the nation. We've put in place several strategies aimed at staying one step ahead of those individuals and groups that may seek to inflict harm on the public or through actions or deeds. At its core is continuing the important work of building trust with the many communities that we serve. That's why we place such an enormous emphasis on community engagement, positive, proactive community engagement through public events and all kinds of specialized programs. I know we've done a lot of events in your district. I would encourage everyone to participate in those too. Everything from catalytic converter thefts to vehicular hijackings. It's the best way to get up-to-date information from our agency. We value partnerships with our elected officials, obviously. After all, they have a very special relationship with the constituents they serve, and can help urge residents to contact law enforcement or reach out to our office if they're seeking clarity or additional information. Our office has an entire team of analysts and investigators whose sole purpose is to gather and share intelligence that may be collected out in the field or even in the county jail. We closely monitor emerging threats online and take very proactive measures to ensure that groups which may be targets of hate speech and hate crimes are notified in advance of potential threats. For example, Sheriff's Office maintains a strong relationship with members of the faith-based community and take very proactive measures to protect parishioners across all faiths. During, as an example, and it's something I work on every year, during the run-up to religious holidays, our officers and investigators provide the public with an added layer of visibility by continuing to monitor those threats which may originate on the web, but by also performing additional premise checks. And we have plainclothes police officers and unmarked units assigned to the areas around religious holidays. And we check in with our faith-based leaders all the time. We're at churches, synagogues, mosques, everywhere we can be. And oftentimes we receive invitations from individual commissioners. Increasing visibility where and when we can is very important. It's a practical step, as you may be aware. The past couple years have been particularly difficult for many in our Asian American community. And while our resources are finite, we get creative about how we expand our visibility. So a good example is Chicago's Chinatown community. A lot of members of both Pacific and residential neighborhoods were concerned about the fairly dramatic uptick in Asian hate crimes. And we thought a good way to expand visibility and bring peace of mind to the community would be to have a number of our specialized units that generally start their day in a police station or a courthouse, instead begin to perform their initial shift out in the community. So we would have individuals from civil process units, orders of protection, eviction teams, patrols, all start their day out in the community with high visibility, and we learned after the fact that had provided a lot of peace of mind to the community to see our officers present in very, very large numbers. Cook County Sheriff's Office also established and monitors a hate crime hotline where we receive tips and concerns from the public. I encourage everyone to write that down. Store it in your phone. So if you have a pen handy, I'll give it to you, but I can get it through the Commissioner's office later. That's 773-674-HELP, 4356, 773-674-HELP, and that's at the County Sheriff's Discrimination Hotline.
Wait. We didn't get our hands out of that.
773-674-HELP, 4356. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about how the Cook County Sheriff's Office provides victims of hate crimes, their families, and the community at large with a little bit more support, particularly when someone is experiencing a significant trauma. Approximately 4 years ago, Sheriff Dart launched a unit known as the Treatment Response Team. This unit is comprised of clinicians and social workers who help officers out in the field, provide an added layer of support to individuals who may be suffering. And here's how that works. A detective or a patrol officer might be out in the community, get a call of something like a domestic incident or an offender that may be threatening his or her own life. And when we arrive, we may find that the victim or the offender is experiencing some significant emotional duress. And under this program, our officers can very calmly, once the scene is cleared and stabilized, provide a subject with a way to speak with a social worker and clinician in real time through a tablet, like an iPad. So it may be in a bedroom or an ambulance or back of a squad car or at a neighbor's home. And that program has been very, very successful. There's no limit on how long they can speak to anyone, and our services don't just end at that event. We follow up with them in the days and weeks after to provide a very, very expansive linkage of services, mental health services, substance abuse, insurance information, unemployment, and things like that. So the program has been very successful. It's been replicated in 28 different law enforcement agencies throughout the county. It's a great thing. It's being expanded nationally, and I would urge you to learn a little bit more about it. You can call me afterwards, and we'll tell you all about it. Again, I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to come here today and listen to the Sheriff's Office. My colleagues here can answer many of your questions, and please don't hesitate to reach out to our office through the Commissioner's office if you have any questions whatsoever. Thank you.
Jason is one of the first people I had in my phone when I first got elected, and he probably regrets giving me that number, but I call him all the time. So thank you for all of the partnership that you and obviously the sheriff, who has been not only a great colleague and ally, but a great friend in everything that I try and do for our community. So thank you very much. Next, we're going to hear from the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. Wissam, you want to come on up?
Well, thank you all for having us here today, and specifically to Commissioner Scott Britton and his staff for hosting us and organizing this. Julie's giving the wave in the back. It's a lot of work to do this, and it's an honor to be here with such amazing agencies and partners. I wanted to take the point off what Jason was just talking about. It's kind of like a timeline that you're seeing between our agencies, the Sheriff's Office, the State's Attorney's Office, and Department on Human Relations of when does a hate crime occur? What happens? What's the next steps? And specifically, I wanted to start off by saying, what's the legal definition of a hate crime? Because I see so many nonprofit leaders in this room who work in this industry, and I've personally spoken to many of you, and we have this common consensus with the ordinary public who ask, what is a hate crime? A lot of people say the famous phrase, well, Wissam, you know it when you see it. It's just there. It's common sense, right? Well, the Illinois legislature actually came up with an answer to that question. And per their statute, a hate crime is an act a person commits when by reason of actual or even perceived race, color, creed, religion, ancestry, gender, sexual orientation, and the list goes on and on and on, that is committed against another individual. According to the Chicago Police Department's Hate Crime Data Dashboard, from 2021 to 2022, hate incidents have doubled in just 1 year alone. Now, there's numerous factors that I know my colleagues here sitting along with me and the nonprofit leaders here may know about. For instance, the contentious presidential election that took place. I see our friends from Castle joining us here, the Chinese American Services League, who know that when COVID was rampant, that there was an uptick and massive spike in anti-Asian hate because of COVID that occurred. Now, specifically, these data points that I'm talking about, this only includes reported incidents of hate. Everyone's nodding in this room with me right now. How many incidents of hate occur that are not reported? Who knows what it could be, even more than doubled. But what we do know, as of right now, that anti-LGBTQ plus anti-hate acts are at an all-time high, specifically within the male black trans community. I mean, Chicago right now is ranked within the top three in the entire nation within this specific category of hate. Now, with hate rising, I want to talk about this timeline that Jason started to touch on. What happens once a hate incident actually occurs? And our colleagues here, or the Chicago Police Department or local police department, makes that arrest. Well, if a misdemeanor were to occur, and let's say the example of being a battery, because the act is committed with this prejudice, with this bias, with this intention of hate, it could possibly be enhanced into a felony. And let's give an example that it just starts off as a felony. Our felony review team would go out, meet with our colleagues on scene. You can see the nods already happening. They've been through this 1,000 times. And let's use an example of, let's say an aggravated battery. Someone was using racial slurs and just beat someone up to almost to death. They lost their teeth, or let's say they were placed into almost an unconscious state because of their hatefulness. Okay? Our felony review team would meet with our colleagues, do the investigation, and charge it as, let's say, an aggravated battery. Now, we take this defendant into court. Now, this is a very special month indeed. I'm sure many of you know, I know the Commissioner knows, that the SAFETY Act, and specifically respectively, our court systems have drastically changed this month alone. So what used to be called bond court is now first time appearance court. The defendant would be brought in front of a judge, and the prosecutors, the state's attorney's office, would present aggravating factors, and the defense attorney would present mitigating factors as to why this defendant should or should not be held in custody under a monetary bond. Now, once that decision is made by the judge, not our office, the decision is made by the judge whether or not to hold this individual in custody, now we proceed with the case. Now, the Sheriff's Office and the Department of Human Relations will talk about some of the resources they have for victims, but within our office, we have a whole unit. Again, we are the second largest prosecutor's office in the entire nation, and we have a vast variety of resources for our victims, a whole unit called the Victim Witness Service Unit. And particularly, some of you may know them as victim advocates. We have a victim witness attached to every single one of these cases. Now, this victim witness will work personally with this victim, and we're using this hypothetical of this hate crime, and guide them throughout the entire case proceeding, from beginning all the way to the trial posture. So, at the beginning of the case, the victim will need to know about status updates, discovery updates, what's the legalese that the judge is using and attorneys are using and how those are explained. But more importantly, if we use that example of the individual who is, let's say, the aggravated battery victim, they're going to need more services than just understanding what is happening live in the courtroom. And our victim services provide those resources. And that is mental health therapy. You know, let's use that individual as an example. Maybe they have PTSD because of this now. All right, let's pretend that their clothes were burned. How do we get those clothes back if I can't afford it? Providing resources like that. For instance, we have a partnership with the Attorney General's office. What if that person's teeth were broken in? Well, we have a partnership with the Attorney General's office and get them dental care. And there's so many different other types of resources. And if we're not able to provide certain types of resources that that individual needs, that's where we partner with our nonprofit communities. And I'll talk more a bit about that. We have multiple nonprofits in this room that we partner with according to that. Now, specifically, before I get to the partnership aspect, we get to the trial phase. Let's pretend now that the individual is found guilty. All right? Now we transition, whether it's a jury trial or bench trial, we get into something many of you in this room know. It's famously called sentencing. The person is now going to be sentenced. So let's say for the aggravated battery, you know, the judge is considering out loud 3 years, right? Well, there's an opportunity for two things to occur on our end. That the state's attorney is allowed and seeks permission from the judge, which is traditionally granted, to have that victim have a victim impact statement, to step up in front of everyone and tell the judge how this incident affected them personally. The judge gets to hear that story. And hypothetically, they would have heard the story at trial, but they get to hear that and how it affected them. And that testimony usually isn't revealed in trial. So the second part is that the state's attorney's office is able to present an aggravating factor about the facts and circumstances of the case, which is that this attack was motivated by hate, that there was a prejudice, a bias that enacted this person to commit this crime. And hearing this aggravating factor in the victim impact statement could convince the judge to extend that sentence. Now, what happens once the case is over? Well, a vast majority of our office at this point now passes the time to other allies, nonprofit communities that are sitting here as well. And I want to talk about the partnership in just a second. There are other avenues for relief for victims. So we have a partnership right now, and specifically in the city of Chicago, with the Department of the Commission on Human Relations. And something that they offer that many of you may not know about, you should report a hate crime to their commission, because they will attach they have a really specific individual who is a hate crime victim advocate. And he follows all the hate crime cases that are occurring within the city of Chicago. And he tracks them day by day and court by court on top of our victim advocate, right? So you get double the bonus there. And additionally, once the case is over criminally, they actually offer pro bono services, they'll refer you to pro bono services, where you can hire an attorney to sue that defendant civilly to possibly get monetary damages. And I saw some people smiling and nodding about that one, money is always a thing, right? But I also wanted to talk about the nonprofit aspect. For example, I'd like to use Castle as the example here. We have such great friends with them. Let's use an example where the individual who was a victim was a Chinese American. We don't have necessarily the resources, by all means we can get interpretation services, to have that cultural feel, that normative feel where the victim feels comfortable, being able to have a state's attorney or perhaps a victim advocate understand the cultural norms of why did they get attacked this way in this manner. And that's where we lean on our nonprofit community partners to provide additional resources that we may not have, as a matter of fact. Now, to the nonprofit community leaders here, I'd like to say, if you want to partner with our office, right now we have a running list on our website of nonprofits and commissions that we partner with in the courtroom and outside the courtroom to work on these types of cases. Happy to talk after this panel discussion is over. Now, to the victims of hate crimes, and I do see we're live as well right now, to the victims of any hate crimes, or unfortunately to any potential future hate crime victims, our office wants to let you know that we take these crimes extremely seriously. This is not a joke to any community. Commissioner Britton just talked about what this day means for so many Muslim Americans and what this day means for other Americans of different backgrounds and faiths. And Cook County specifically is such a beautiful mosaic when it comes to diversity. I mean, just take a look at the people in this room, how diverse it is, from different faiths and backgrounds. And our office's goal is to help protect that diversity and to ensure that justice is being done for all hate crime victims. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And our final presentation before our discussion is going to be from the Cook County Department of Human Rights and Ethics. Ajika, you would come up, and Ajika, I believe you have a PowerPoint, is that also?
Yes.
Awesome.
And
Take it away.
just so I understand correctly, it's already on the. Yep. Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for your attention this evening. Again, my name is Ajika Sumter. I am the Community Outreach and Training Coordinator from the Cook County Commission on Human Rights, which is one half Commission on Human Rights and one half the Board of Ethics. So, of course, today I'm coming to you on behalf of the Commission side. I want to thank Commissioner Britton's office and Cook County United Against Hate so much for this opportunity to present on behalf of the Commission, and I'm so honored to be around some esteemed county colleagues as well to talk about hate crime remedies this evening. So I'm just going to do a general rundown of what the Commission on Human Rights does at the county level, and of course any questions will be reserved for the Q&A portion toward the end. So the mission of the Cook County Commission on Human Rights is twofold. First, we protect people in Cook County from discrimination and harassment in 5 protection areas, which include housing, employment, public accommodations, credit transactions, and access to county facilities, services, and programs. And secondly, we ensure that those who work in or to the benefit of Cook County are paid appropriate wages and receive appropriate benefits for their work. And we do so in a variety of ways. Our work encompasses these 5 ordinances. The first, and probably the one that will be most uplifted today, is the Human Rights Ordinance. But we also enforce several labor and wage-related laws as well, including the Living Wage Ordinance, the Minimum Wage Ordinance, the Earned Sick Leave Ordinance, and the COVID-19 vaccination rights for employees and employer obligations ordinance. So the Human Rights Ordinance covers 18 protected classes classes, and essentially protected classes are the identities that people are either perceived or actually belonging to. I'm not going to go through this list. I'm just going to highlight a few of our key ones, including race, color, sex. But we also have some really interesting and unique ones that have recently been passed underneath the Human Rights Ordinance, including protections for ethnicity, bodily autonomy, pregnancy status, and caste. And we are also very proud of our Just Housing Amendment, which is covered underneath our protected classes. It specifically protects individuals with covered criminal history, so conviction and arrest records, from discrimination in the housing space, excuse me. And as you can see on the bottom, it says fair chance in housing. So that's essentially what we try to uplift. But all of these, of course, are extremely important. So just a little brief overview of the Just Housing Amendment protection, and we're, I believe, the only county in the United States that has this protection, but of course there are equivalent laws across Cook County when it comes to protecting individuals with criminal justice involvement from discrimination in the housing space. But underneath the Just Housing Amendment, there are these two key points that we like to highlight. So housing providers, which includes like landlords and property managers, in Cook County, including the city of Chicago, cannot consider criminal history that is more than 3 years old when assessing somebody's housing application. And if there is criminal history from within that 3-year period, a landlord or property manager must conduct an individualized assessment of any criminal history as part of the housing application process. And essentially this two-tiered system ensures that people are not being unjustly denied housing just on the basis of their criminal justice involvement or their previous criminal history. And just to talk a little bit about our wage and benefit laws, we enforce the Cook County Minimum Wage Ordinance. So as of July 1, if you have or have not heard, the county minimum wage for non-tipped workers is $13.70 per hour, and the base wage for tipped employees is $8 an hour. And so there are particular municipalities in Cook County that have opted into the minimum wage, but we just want to ensure that people, again, are being paid appropriate wages for their labor. We also enforce the Earned Sick Leave Ordinance, in that employers are required to provide at least 1 hour of sick leave for every 40 hours worked. And finally, the Living Wage Ordinance, which I'm not sure if there are any Cook County vendors in the room, but essentially we want to ensure that vendors are also paying their employees a fair wage as they're contracting with Cook County. So the living wage for Cook County vendors who are providing their employees health benefits is $14.42, and for those that are not providing those benefits, it would be $18.03 per hour. So who are we and what do we do? So we have several peer agencies that you're probably familiar with. I do like to note that the Cook County Commission on Human Rights is fairly small. We only have a staff of about 9 full-time employees, but we do a lot of work. So we have our peers at the Illinois Department of Human Rights, the Chicago Commission on Human Relations, and the US EEOC, so the Employment and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. I always forget that acronym. Thank you, because it's just what essentially the same as our peers. We receive and investigate complaints of discrimination and harassment. We mediate disputes and conduct hearings. We conduct community outreach, just like this, to educate the public on their rights and responsibilities under our several protection areas. And we collaborate with several human rights groups. We collaborate with different county offices, county commissioners, of course, and community advocates across the Cook County region. So there are some key differences as to how much we can actually do at the Cook County Commission on Human Rights. So unlike our partners here today, we only conduct civil complaints. We do not conduct criminal complaints, in that we cannot issue orders of protection, and filing with us will not result in a criminal investigation or any arrests. And there are also jurisdictional issues. Unlike the Sheriff's Office, who may defer to local municipalities for their law enforcement and that assistance, Our coverage is in place for the entirety of Cook County unless there is an equivalent local law in place. So just to talk about our complaint filing process, and I'll get into it a little bit more in the next slide as well. So it is free to file a complaint with us. It does not require an attorney, but if you would like to utilize the services of an attorney, you are encouraged to do so. We do have a time frame to file complaints, so you have to file within 180 days, which is roughly 6 months from the date of the alleged violation, and that's for the Human Rights Ordinance. And regarding labor, within 3 years of the date of alleged violation. And we have a multitude of ways that you can file with us, including email. If you would like to come to our office downtown at 69 West Washington, Suite 1130, you're able to file a complaint in person, and you're also able to download our complaint form and submit it to us via mail. We also have a fax system, but I mean, who's really using fax at this point? And soon, we're actually extremely excited to be unveiling a case management system that should be available and live for public use toward the end of this year. We're currently in process with that. So a complaint has to cover these bases in order to be considered complete. So a statement of facts, which is essentially your narration of what violation occurred and when. That would be including if the violation is ongoing, the city and state in which the violation has occurred, the basis of discrimination, and it goes back to the protected classes that I mentioned earlier: race, gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, etc. And finally, and this is probably one of the most important things, a signature of the complaint or the attorney or the representative filing the complaint. You can have all of the components of a complaint, but it is not considered complete until it is actually signed by either the complainant or their representative. So this is essentially a schematic of the complaint filing process. I'm going to leave it up here for a little bit while I sort of talk through it. So of course, investigations start with a filed complaint. So that needs to be submitted to us first. It is then assigned to an investigator, and the investigator serves the respondent, which is just the offending party, with a notice that this complaint has been filed with the commission. The offending party has the opportunity to write their own arguments, as well as the complainant, and that essentially initiates the investigation process. Now, investigations can go a couple of different ways. The first little branch off that you see is the mediation conference. And one thing that we're actually extremely proud of at the Commission on Human Rights is that 1/3 of our complaints actually go to mediation and are solved through mediation. And for those of us in the room who are a little curious about what mediation involves, it's essentially getting both parties to come together, the complainant and the offending party, or the victim and the offending party, to come together and find some mutually beneficial resolution and holistic resolution that does not require them to return to the investigation process and potentially go to administrative hearing. That's completely optional, but we do have a great partnership with an organization that does mediations that we oftentimes facilitate mediation conferences through. And in the event that it is successful, the case is dismissed and the parties will make an agreement or settle the agreement privately. But in the event that they do not want to proceed to mediation conference, or the mediation conference is not successful, it then goes back to the investigation process, which then turns into an evidence determination. And you either have a finding of substantial evidence or a lack of substantial evidence. So underneath the finding of substantial evidence, it basically says that the investigator has found that something underneath your particular complaint does constitute a violation of the Human Rights Ordinance, and they will refer it to administrative hearing, where essentially an administrative law judge will listen to the details of the case and make a decision based off of the details of the case to determine whether or not a violation has occurred. So essentially it's just another layer to determine the facts and what has actually happened and whether or not there has been a violation of someone's human rights underneath the Human Rights Ordinance. The administrative law judge will will then propose a decision and give an order to the commission, and then the commission, which is constituted right now of 8 human rights commissioners, but in total there are 11 spots, will then make a final decision on whether or not a violation has occurred. If they determine that a violation has not occurred, then the case is dismissed. But if they do find that a violation has occurred, then of course they find in favor of the complainant, and awards or any other remedies are assessed, and they would be responsible for paying that to the complainant. On the other side of things, there's a lack of substantial evidence, which essentially means that given the statement of facts, given the investigation, there's been no determination that a violation of someone's human rights has occurred. They will then dismiss the case, but there is an opportunity to essentially appeal that decision, which is the request for reconsideration. And then there are two specific remedies that could come from that. Either the request for reconsideration is granted and then it restarts the investigation process, or it is denied and the case is dismissed outright with, of course, no remedy to the complainant or to the victimized party. So who can you call? Please email or call the Commission on Human Rights with any questions that you may have. We actually, our phone line serves a dual purpose. You could either call to get information on how to file a complaint, or you could call with general questions as to whether or not a situation you experience constitutes a complaint, and we actually do a really good job of either referring you to services that can provide you the particular resources you're looking for, whether that's pro bono law services or tenants' rights organizations, people essentially that can talk you through the trauma that you've been through. But we can also refer you directly to one of our investigators, and we have a great team of investigators who will be able to talk you through what a complaint process could look like and potentially get that complaint process initiated for you. So email is human.rights@cookcountyil.gov. Our phone is 312-603-1100. That is our main office line, but it also serves as the human rights line. And I wish that I didn't include this bit.ly link, but it is a link to our website. So if you are able to just go to the Cook County website and in the search bar type Commission on Human Rights, you'd be able to find our agency page and all of our services that we provide. And we do have a gamut of resources that we also create internally for the purposes of informing the public of their rights. One of the newest resources is actually our commission guide, Your Rights in Cook County. We've been pushing this really, really hard on our social media channels and in our newsletter, but it is essentially a 20-page document that talks about the complaint process and all the things that we do at the Commission on Human Rights. Our policy analyst, who unfortunately was not able to be here today, worked really, really hard to get this off the ground, so we really want to uplift it. And it's available in English and Spanish, and we're currently in the process of trying to figure out how else it can be translated, because a lot of our documents are actually translated in 4 languages: English, Spanish, Polish, and simplified Chinese. Please follow us on social media on Facebook at the Cook County Commission on Human Rights. We also have a Twitter, Cook County Human Rights. We also have an Instagram, Cook County Human Rights. And we also have a newsletter that is small but mighty. We currently have about 1,460 subscribers. And of course, we're always looking to increase that subscriber list so that you can stay abreast of all of the work that we're doing at the Commission and all the ways that you can either get involved through trainings, to learn more about how you can provide resources to the community organizations and individuals that you work with, and the like. So, that is my spiel. Thank you so much for your time and attention today, and have a good one.
All right, so anybody who has a card, if you want to hold it up, we'll go grab it for you, and then we'll ask, see if we can ask a few questions about the panelists. And I'm going to ask anybody who answers these to use this mic. Jason, you get a hand first. I do want to point out that, while this is a county-centric presentation, because that's where I come from, it's incredibly important for us to maintain our relationship with local law enforcement, We have Chief Pecora from Arlington Heights. Do you really want the Bears after yesterday? Disregard that. It's incredibly important. I come from municipal government when I was a trustee in Glenview, and our relationship with our local police department is incredibly important. I know Jason would echo that because that's kind of the front line for those of you who live in incorporated parts of Cook County as opposed to non. So I'll start off with this question, and you can, anybody who wants to jump in, maybe we'll start with the state's attorney on this thing. So how is privacy protected if a citizen reports an incident? What is the basic rule or regulation that relates to a privacy concern of the citizen?
So can we get more in detail to that question? So let's say if an arrest is made and the defendant's now in court, are we talking about the privacy of the victim, the defendant, or the victim? Okay, so do we need these? Do we need these? Do we need these?
No.
No. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
That makes it easier.
Yeah, a lot easier. I mean, I don't know if anyone else does. Yeah. So with the defendant in particular, you know, it is public. It's a public forum. A courtroom is a public forum, so you're able to walk in and watch the case proceedings. Now, in terms of the victim, right? Their personal information, let's say their address, where the incident occurred, their private information that the sheriff or the police may collect, that's sealed. That's only between our offices, right? And that is not available to the public whatsoever. So this goes back to the fact that, you know, I know the commissions have been doing such a great job with the sheriff about creating a hotline. Do not, under any circumstance, be afraid to report that hate crime that's occurred to you. Do not think for a second that your information, once I get to court, oh my God, it's going to be revealed and the whole world's going to know. No. Yes, there is going to be a moment, you know, let's say if the defendant chose not to plead guilty, that you would testify potentially at trial, right? But in terms of your private information being revealed, that is between our partners only. And that is to not be released to the public or anyone else. So that's at least for us.
Absolutely.
Should not stop you from reporting that type of crime. When you're a victim of this type of crime, we don't start throwing your address, your name out there. We want to learn about you. We're going to do our investigation. And before we do anything, meaning say if we're lucky enough we're able to identify an offender, we would let you know, do you want him or her arrested? So nothing should ever be a surprise to you when you're dealing with a police investigation. And it's good to report it because being with the sheriff's police, we work with our suburban agencies and the city all the time. So we can say, you're not the only one. This happened to this person right down the street from you. So you don't have to feel so alone. So don't ever let that stop you from calling the police and reporting it.
And I can speak to that. When I had the anti-Semitic literature dropped off in my driveway, I called the local Glenview Police Department. Whether that's a crime or not, you know, is a different issue, but I think it should be reported, and I certainly did that. I would certainly urge anyone who's subject to an actual crime to prosecute and to testify. It's extremely important because it doesn't happen to somebody else, but I understand people may be concerned about that, but I think it's an incredibly important part of this. And Jason, I guess I'll leave that with you guys, the next question. And I get this from a number of different agencies. When I met with the ADL last week, it was raised as to how and whether we track hate crimes and how it's reported to either the federal government or any state agencies. How does that work?
Well, so it's the way everyone keeps track of any type of crime, batteries, aggravated, it's called a Uniform Crime Reporting System, and that's how those crimes are documented, and they're able to keep the numbers on that.
And that is then identified by any category, or is it an aggravated? If it's an aggravated battery with a hate crime overlay, is that reflected in what's reported, or is it just aggravated battery?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
So the feds are now, they're changing the reporting from UCR into this NIBR system, and it is specific to different crimes can be reported. So you can have an aggravated battery and a hate crime, and the feds will get classifications on those. So that's newer, but it's in the process now being worked.
Okay. And I do think that having those classifications are important. I just saw recently, and again, these are tracked by various agencies and groups. The Saginaw Police Center helps us with this on occasion. But I noticed that there was an increase of 84% in anti-Black, anti-Jewish hate crimes in the last year in Cook County. Those numbers, I think, are important for us to be able to understand, to see where the problems are and then where we can put our resources to try to eliminate that. I guess, the next question is, and I'll throw it out to anyone, and again, having received that information in my driveway, as a lawyer, I would think that probably the only crime that's committed, because they're very careful about not suggesting violence, but just spewing out the hate and the rhetoric of the discriminatory facts that they want to use. But it does seem like there is a line between what is a crime and what is a hate crime. How definitive is it with your agencies as to what those differences may be?
And it goes, Commissioner Britton kind of mentioned this, he's an attorney, he's even kind of processing this question. I would highly suggest, and I know our office would highly suggest, if you are unsure, report it. Call the police, okay? It's not your job and your responsibility to look up the laws and, okay, is this gonna be it? There are so many resources and avenues, like we discussed, even in the scenario that it doesn't end up becoming a crime, right? We talked about the civil avenue, we talked about the commission's avenue, right? There's so many different avenues out there, right? If it doesn't end rising to the level of a hate crime. But just in case if that enhancement is in place, it can still be another type of charge that doesn't have the hate crime enhancement, right? You have to consider these factors. So I know our office would really encourage you all. Don't doubt, just call. Just call. It's better safe than sorry, right? It's always better safe than sorry.
And Achika, I think this might be directed toward you. Particularly in your department, is there a particular emphasis, or do you see a fair amount of issues related to older Americans or senior abuse or those types of things?
That's a really good question. So we don't actually track what kind of protected classes are being discriminated against, or what particular identities are being discriminated against. We just file the complaints and we govern it based off of the nature of the complaint, whether it was in employment, public accommodations, things of that nature. But I can speak to a particular case that we had within the past reporting period in which one of our victims, one of our complainants, was terminated from her employment due to her age. It was discovered through the investigative process that because, aside from the fact that based off of the case details that there were no apparent problems with her actual employment performance, that she was still terminated on the basis of her age. So we actually took steps to investigate that, and I believe it resulted in the complainant and her former employer going to mediation conference, where the complainant was able to receive a settlement as a remedy for the termination. And there are a slew of remedies that can occur. It may not always be monetary damages. Sometimes it could be the restoration of employment or the restoration of housing, things of that nature. So it's kind of a tough question to answer, because even though we do not track the nature of the identity of complainants, we can speak to particular examples in our department that we can see discrimination on the basis of age.
Thank you. I guess this relates to my experience again, where I had an officer from the Glenview Police Department, a very nice young man, who came over and saw the information that I had received, and his first question to me was, "Are you Jewish?" And I said, "That's not really relevant." So I think there needed to be a little more training. So what do you guys do internally in order, specifically on hate crimes, to make sure that your officers or your assistant state's attorneys or the employees who work in your departments, that they're aware of how this works and where it should be addressed and prosecuted? Sam, you can start.
Yeah, so the ASAs they're trained to not ask those types of like, say, personal or ethnic background. Now, obviously, if the police report, our officers were to discuss with the victim, and the victim brings it up, or throughout the course of the investigation with the police, that it's raised to our attention, it's going to be in our knowledge, and we need to have that conversation with the victim. But to kind of get invasive, unless the crime literally wraps around that important point, of course we're going to have that conversation with the victim, but unless the actual crime doesn't call for it, there shouldn't be a need to do that. Our ASAs are trained to do that, but when it comes to hate crimes specifically, they, especially with the felony review team, they are trained to have these types of observations, be mindful of these observations, the big picture, and so that way they can look out for that hate crime enhancement to occur. Now, when it comes, let's say, straight as a misdemeanor, the victim can't, if they believe, hey, it wasn't considered by a hate crime for whatever reason, this was a hate crime against me, and pretend now they're in misdemeanor court. They can raise that to their prosecutor and say, hey, this, let's say this theft occurred because I'm XYZ. And they can bring that up to their assistant state's attorney, and that ASA could change the outcome of that case accordingly, if it makes sense to do that.
And I think in those areas of incorporated Cook County, it would still be the first line of reporting would be the local police department, is that correct?
Yes, Commissioner.
And again, if it was in incorporated Arlington Heights, you'd call it Arlington Heights Police Department, they would follow up and then obviously get the state's attorneys involved as well. This is more of a general question and maybe more policy than legally related, but let's say we see something that looks like hate speech, may not rise to the level of a hate crime. Do you have any advice for those who are listening or the people in the room? Is there something we should be doing to call this out? My take on this would be, I remember many years ago I was at a wedding and someone used the N-word. And I was shocked because I thought, who is this moron who just used the N-word? And I didn't say anything at the time. And I regret that to this day, because I still remember it. This is probably 30 years ago. Because today I would say something. And would you also recommend, obviously not taking violent action, but to call this out and to make sure that we understand that this stuff is not acceptable in our communities?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I don't know how personal this is getting, but I think it always comes down to having conversations within your communities about what constitutes hate speech and what constitutes discrimination. I'm personally passionate about that because, sometimes we can be so passive in how we think and how we address different groups of people from a lack of understanding that we may make mistakes in speaking from a place of bias or prejudice against people or a group of people that we don't actually know or we don't connect with on any level. So I always believe that the first level of combating hate is within our communities, and that includes calling out your family members, that includes calling out your friends, and then elevating that to where you're having conversations in your workplace as well. Sam and Commissioner Britton brought up great points about what does it mean to be in the office environment, to have proper training and cultural competence, really centering those as parts of the conversation so that we can all do good work and so that we can continue to minimize bias and hate across Cook County. And part of that is also, I don't want to be too colloquial, but checking your coworkers and really thinking about how do you keep people informed. One of the things that we do is raising current events for our staff in order to continue a dialogue as to what forms of discrimination and hate look like in more insidious ways, because we automatically assume that with a lot of these instances that they're overt acts of hate, and many of them are, but microaggressions are just as damaging and just as pervasive, if not more pervasive. So I think I would just lend that to the conversation.
And I've learned this from the LGBTQ plus community, but silence is violence in my view. I think that anytime we don't call these things out. It is a problem. I remember very distinctly Alison Pure-Slovan and I had this conversation when we first got together after the anti-Semitic literature was distributed all over the north suburbs, as to whether we're supposed to just not say anything and let this die in the mind, or to call it out and to say that this is not acceptable. I think it's universally considered best to call it out and to say, appropriately, that this is something that we're not going to tolerate and it should not be allowed. I'm reminded of the survey that was done recently in the Buffalo Grove high school system, where 18 Jewish youths were asked if they experienced anti-Semitic actions or violence, and 15, I think, out of 18 said yes. So it continues, and to a certain extent, having initiated this United Against Hate initiative, I've seen what seems like just my finger in the dam, because it seems like it's constant. It shifts. For a while, it was drag shows. Now it seems to be moving back towards anti-vigilant, and I think we have to stay committed to the concepts that we're trying to put forward here, not in our communities as we roll this out throughout Cook County, and I hope beyond, that it's going to make a difference in people's lives. And I've said this multiple times. If there's a kid walking down the corridor of Glenbrook South High School, where my kids went, who was wearing a Star of David necklace or who was wearing a Pride T-shirt, to understand that their community has their back, that they're loved, that they're appreciated, and that they have a right to live their own authentic life. I think if they get that sense from what we're doing here, we've had success. So I want to thank everyone for being here as part of this program. I always figure that we get nobody's show, and then we have a full house. I really appreciate that. Thank you all for coming, and thanks for